Okay, continuing on with the sickness unto death, uh, Kierkegaard is trying again to think human freedom. Here he's thinking it as a problem spiritually between faith and despair. In a certain sense, despair is kind of the spiritual equivalent to the psychological anxiety. Okay, both deal with freedom, but spiritually versus psychologically. He'll sometimes refer to anxiety as dizziness in the sickness unto death, dizziness. And it's interesting, in the concept of anxiety, I get very excited there. In the concept of anxiety, he says he can. It's all about how he conceives of the human person. Okay, so in the concept of anxiety, he says the human being is thought as a synthesis of the psychic and the somatic. That is the soul and the body, the mind and the body, and they are sublated. Remember, negative dialectics, sublated, the Aufhebung, through a free leap, and that third synthesis is spirit. So body, soul, body, mind, spirit come together. And when the mind and the body are disjointed, if you will, when the soul is kind of thinking about synthesizing into the body or leaping into the body, making a choice, that experience is felt as a kind of dizziness, which we call anxiety. It's awareness of possibility. It's the awareness of my possibility as possibility of possibility, or freedom's actuality as possibility of possibility. In other words, I'm aware of the problem of being, but I'm feeling it psychologically as a tension between the psychic and the somatic, or the mind and the body. Translate that to thinking it spiritually in the sickness unto death. He thinks not in terms of the human being as a synthesis of the psychic and the somatic, but rather a synthesis that is of the self's relation to itself. Okay? A synthesis, a spiritual synthesis in spirit of the self's relationship to itself, which is analogous, or sort of analogous, yeah, I guess analogous would be the right word, to what's going on in the concept of anxiety, but very different. So at the beginning of Sickness Unto Death, he has this great passage, which I've read to you before, I think on the Zoom. What is a self? The human being is a self. What's a self? The self is a synthesis. What's synthesis? It's a relation. It's a relation that relates itself to itself. And it's in that relation there's a synthesis, right? And the big question of the sickness unto death is conceiving of the human being spiritually as this relation that can only be resolved in faith. And the problems we go through in life, there's various stages in life and various dimensions that the self has itself as a problem to be worked out spiritually as a self-relation that relates itself to itself, and how a lot of moments in the self progression, if you will, are confronted with the problem of faith or despair. Okay? And that's where this idea of the 3 stages of life comes in. Okay, 3 stages of life, which I'll talk about in the next video. But understand this. The sickness unto death is about the problem of faith and despair, the problem of freedom, in particular, or thought in the register of the human being as having itself as a task, as having its being to be. Dasein in the Heideggerian sense. We are the only being that has our being to be. Our being is an issue, a problem, a question, right? What is the human being? That's what it means to be a human being. Then we'd ask the question what it means to be a human being. In the sickness unto death, the self is thought as a spiritual problem that needs to be worked out and can only be worked out in faith, or what Kierkegaard calls resting in the power that established it, or resting in the power that established you, or resting in the power that posited you is one of the old translations. In other words, we have ourself as a problem. This is classic existentialism. Ourself is a problem and a task. And every time we go through life, we're going to be confronted with this problem at various stages in our life where we have to become explicit about whether we want to make a self or don't want to make a self. And each one of those stages will require a leap either into faith or despair, if you want to think of it that way.